Hello, everyone. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio Network, a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. And our mantra is educate, enlighten, and entertain. The views of the guest may not represent those of the host of the station. Folks, I get excited every time I do a show, and especially when I have a Jersey gal in the house that I'll be talking to. Got to help my Jersey peeps out. I have with me today such a talented, phenomenal person. My guest today is Jody Small. She is executive producer at Jody Small Productions. She is an award-winning producer, filmmaker, writer, director. She produced the centerpiece Oral History at the New Jersey Vietnam Era Educational Center in Homedale, New Jersey. And I just want to add, if you live in New Jersey, even if you don't live in New Jersey, highly recommend you go. It's very heart-touching. You will be touched. And was founding director of film and video at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. Jody Small just finished her one-hour documentary film, The Storm in the Boats, a pandemic stories project, which the full collection of interviews will be preserved at the Rutgers Oral History Archive. Welcome, Jody Small, to Chatting with Betsy.
Thank you so much, Betsy, for having me today. I look forward to our conversation.
You are welcome. When I saw clips of your documentary, I was touched, and I will I'll tell you why. My brother, Bradley, died during the height of COVID. He didn't have COVID, but we couldn't see him. We could not visit him. Thankfully, my other brother, and my mom were able to be with Bradley when he died. And it bothered me, Jody. Then we couldn't visit him. And it haunted me. What was he thinking? What was Bradley thinking? That nobody was there from his family. Yes. And I had to say goodbye to my brother on the phone. And it just, get for Clem just thinking about it, it just cut me to my core. So I want to personally thank you for making this documentary and telling people stories, because not just my life, but so many other lives have been affected. So I'd like to ask you, how did you come about thinking of doing this documentary?
Well, first of all, Betsy, I'm so sorry for what you went through, and there is actually featured in our documentary a emergency room doctor who ended up volunteering to contact families who were unable to say goodbye to their loved ones, and she was part of the iPads in the room, which we've all heard about, bringing them
right
in the final moments of life for people to say goodbye to their loved ones. And, you know, this was one of the coolest aspects of COVID, to not be able to be there to say goodbye to your loved one is just, you know, I would never say I know how you feel, because I can't even imagine it. But we do cover some of those kinds of stories that are pretty difficult to hear. But the whole film is not a complete downer, in the sense that people also rose up in beautiful ways, and we can talk about that later. But Betsy, how did this all start? You know, I have a background as a storyteller, and during COVID, I really felt an urgency to do something, and yet I was sidelined. Remember, we were all shut in, and we had to wear masks, and we walked to the other side of the street when people were coming toward us. And so the minute I got vaccinated, I said I must contribute in some way to this global historical event. And what skills do I have? And began to realize I could set up, my husband thought I was crazy, by the way. I'm going to set up a makeshift studio in my basement, and I'm going to start putting it out there on social media, who wants to share their pandemic stories. And this will be called Pandemic Stories Project. And let's see what I can do. But in the interim, I wanted them filmed professionally. So while I'm the producer, writer, director, I lured my videographer, who I do a lot of work with normally, into this idea that this was very important, and while I didn't have 1 red cent to pay him, he should really be involved. And lucky for me, he said, okay, I'll give you a few interviews. So I'm very, very grateful to him. And I should mention and call out the Rutgers University Oral History Archive and the New Jersey Historical Commission for eventually providing some funding for our production costs. So that made us feel, much more supported in this endeavor. But I literally put it out there, and people began filling out this form that I had, and the stories were just incredible. I call it the amazing avalanche, because all the stories were different, and people just what they went through, ways that they grew, ways that they felt loss, how they experienced family time, their jobs, family life, and of course the chaos, the absolute chaos for young families with young children. And we can go into a little bit about what some of the people said, but basically the way I got started is I just started.
I am so glad you did this project. That sounds fascinating. I read about, I saw on your I think it was your website, either that or it was your Facebook page, about a woman who had she said a drive-by mastectomy, because yes. I guess they got them in and out of they get in and out of the hospital anyway prior to COVID. I could just imagine with COVID just getting, people out as quickly
yes.
as possible.
That is actually the mayor of Fair Lawn, New Jersey. Her name is Gail Rottenstrich, if you don't know her. And she was diagnosed, and she said it was the thing she remembered the most about COVID was her drive-through double mastectomy reconstruction. And she basically came home the same day. This is a surgery that you stay in the hospital for days, and they sent her home, she said, with lots of drugs and tubes and whatnot. But it was really important that she had that surgery. And obviously they were trying to protect people from, other patients with COVID. There was just so little that we knew at the time. So, that was one of the very powerful stories.
Oh, that is. I mean, I have to say, and this might, and thank you for your condolences, by the way, Jody, appreciate it. I have to say that COVID is very difficult. My husband died January 1st, 2020. And I'll tell you, I'm glad Matt died before COVID, because, Jody, if I couldn't have been with my husband when he died, I think that would have just completely broken me. And I'm grateful I was there, because they weren't even letting people into hospice during COVID. And I think I might have ended up in jail. I probably would have put on my nurse's uniform to try to sneak in. It was just, but it was no support. Everything closed down in March. So, and my son was deeply affected. I have an adult son with cognitive disability, and his routine is everything. And then you take away his job, social, and it was tough, and a tough time. I am grateful for one thing. Go ahead.
No, tell me about your gratefulness.
I'm grateful that I was stayed at home. I needed the rest. And I'm glad that COVID brought mental health to the forefront. And people were now saying, I'm depressed, I need help. And for that, I'm grateful, because I've been a mental health advocate for many years. And the stigma's still there, but people were saying, even, celebrities, I go for mental health support. And so I'm grateful for that. Go ahead. I digress.
So,
Go ahead.
So just a couple of comments. Again, I'm so sorry regarding your husband. Also, you experienced quite a bit of loss. And in the film, there are people who talk about having to drop off a son and not being able to go into the hospital with him. A woman who drops her husband, doesn't even know where he is for a couple of days when he returns to the hospital. So it truly was a chaotic and something we've just never really experienced, almost a different type of war, right? I have one friend who lost her husband, devastatingly, young man, and she was trying to get an appointment with a medium to speak to him. And she said the lines now for that, or the wait, I should say, are many years long because so many people didn't get that chance to say goodbye or have any kind of final words or hugs or whatever. And I thought that was very interesting. I did not get to interview a medium, but I would like to do that because who would even have thought about that? The other thing I want to say is regarding the mental health aspect. I think I'm in complete agreement with you that this was a major, major part of what happened during the pandemic. And I think we are finally, as a country, as small communities everywhere, people are recognizing the problems with mental health. When I premiered my film at a community center in New Jersey, Care Plus New Jersey, I invited them to join us. And we had a panel discussion after. And I will tell you, according to the Mental Health Association, in 2023, 21% of adults were experiencing a mental illness. That's the equivalent to over 50 million Americans. And the youth report, again, this is from 2023, from the Mental Health Association, 16% of youth report suffering at least one major depressive episode in the past year. That is more than 2.7 million kids experiencing severe major depression. And one woman who was deathly ill in the hospital says what she will remember most from COVID was the anxiety and the mental health aspect, not even being in the hospital and almost dying first. It was the difficulty of dealing with everything around her. And I will say that many of the interviews, and this makes me feel good about doing these interviews, people have said to me, that was so therapeutic. I feel like I've given you my story now. It's safe, and I don't have to think about it anymore. And I thought, oh, that's great for you. Now, I'm heart-heavy walking around with all of these stories. But seriously, though, I'm so grateful to have been the listener and the keeper of their stories. And I think that my storytellers were so brave in coming forward with their stories. And I'm so grateful mostly that I did this very quickly. The minute I got vaccinated and people were allowed to kind of be out and about and be a little closer to one another, whatever, memories were fresh. You know, I think about when I showed my film and how many times people said, oh, wow, I remember that. I forgot about leaving the Amazon packages in the garage. I forgot about wiping down the bananas. That was crazy. And March Madness stopping and washing your hands to happy birthday so that they would really be clean. I mean, Betsy, I'm sure you can relate to some of those things.
Oh, yes. And what's beautiful, Jody, is when we share stories, we connect on a human level, deep human level, because we can relate. And we know we're not alone, because a lot of people think, oh, I'm alone in how I feel and what I went through. And you're not. We're not alone. Sometimes we're afraid to share stories because we're afraid of judgment. But sharing stories brings us closer together as human beings, I feel.
I agree. And I actually feel very close to all of these people. I feel privileged to have been the person that they chose to tell their story to. And Betsy, I'm so confident that the true value of all this will be in the many years ahead, when people said, so what was the pandemic? What happened? You know, what was life like for you? And now we have these interviews, of course, along with, I'm sure, others who have done this. And people will be able to really understand a little bit more about the time. You know, many people said, wouldn't it be great if we had, you know, more than just a couple of small pieces of writing about the Spanish flu in 1918. How are they feeling? How did they survive? You know, nobody was filming that, those kinds of stories. So I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to do that and have that preserved at the Rutgers University Oral History Archive, where literally anyone can go and listen to some of these interviews. I have over 25 hours worth of footage. Though my film is only an hour long, it highlights the stories. But if people are looking for someone who may have experienced something that they did, it's nice that the access to that will be there for generations to come.
That is amazing. That is, what an incredible person you are, Jody. And all these people that you interviewed, they're New Jersey residents. Is that correct?
That is correct. They're all from New Jersey. And to be quite honest with you, Betsy, they're the amazing ones, not me. They were brave. You know, they were brave to put it all aside and come over. I mean, there was one gentleman who had just, prior to the pandemic, 2 years prior, had a bone marrow transplant for cancer, a blood cancer, and he really had to isolate for 2 years. And he was so excited about coming back out to be with people and back to work and go into New York City and just live his life. And as he said, while he was coming out of isolation, everyone else was going back in. And he was wearing a mask before it was fashionable. So he said these times give you a chance to really figure out what's important in life. And we all know that our time here is limited, and how do we want to spend it.
Absolutely.
You know, just another incredible story. He also volunteers for the organization Be the Match, which, as you know, provides bone marrow donors with a match, hopefully, if they in fact do need to a marrow transplant. And so because that saved his life, he volunteers and was explaining that when air travel was put on hold, as you may recall, how did people get their bone marrow? And he said through the organization's political connections with the government and whatnot, they did get special permission to fly some marrow from the U.S. to Europe, and hopefully to save someone's life.
You know, we took so much for granted before the pandemic. And the pandemic just, you could not take anything for granted anymore. Just interacting with people and giving someone a hug and just being with people. I was looking forward to socializing, and I couldn't. So I well, in a way, can understand how this man felt about wanting to go out of isolation, and then he couldn't because I was sort of isolated with caregiving. Did you interview by any chance caregivers who experienced their loved ones' progression by any chance during this time?
No, but I did interview someone who was the head of an emergency department for children who said that people stopped bringing their kids because they were so afraid. And what ended up happening was that the emergency department became a psych ward. And that was because people weren't coming in. And I'm sure many of them were caregivers and people with special needs who just couldn't cope anymore.
Yeah, it was tough. I mean, any mental illness, addiction, whether somebody had an abusive personality, it just escalated during that time. And I even, heard there was waiting list to see a mental health professional, any type of mental health professional during that time. It was
really the birth of telehealth.
Yes.
Right? It was the birth of the opportunity to not have to leave home to get the help you needed.
Yes, telehealth.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, telehealth came in. I wish they would have had that when that was alive, so I didn't have to take them to the doctor. But I do that now with I see a psychologist and telehealth visit. And you just really felt for people. In my son's buddy night group, 3 people died from COVID. And that was really devastating. And everyone was touched in one way or another. And I really, Jody, I felt for people because I can't even imagine having a memorial service 6 months to a year later. And people
people did.
Yes, and people can't even visit you. Like my brother was very popular, well known in Carteret. And we had graveside services. Hardly anyone came to the funeral. Hardly anyone came to visit my mom afterwards because of COVID. And it's just devastating for people to have lost people at that time. Of course, there is no good time to lose anyone, let's face it. But when you have no support at all, people can't even give you a hug during the time that you need it the most, it really is devastating. But I think in a way, Jody, that it brought people closer together maybe in some instances, where life is short, life is precious, time is precious, and to be in contact with people. If you're thinking of someone, call them up. Yeah. There's a reason why they're in your mind. Call them up, text them. And I just think that I just think we need to bring back humanity. And I think that your film, even though I didn't see it, I'd love to see it, will bring back humanity to people, and listening to the stories, and people can relate. There are so many. Did you interview any nurses by any chance? Because they had a really rough. Can you tell me about that?
Yes. Sure, and I did also want to say, in terms of hopefulness, I would be remiss not to mention our Bergen County Commissioner, Tracy Zur, who, and you did get to meet the people sort of in the trailer that I sent you, with the little clips of the individuals. So I'm very glad you at least got to see that for now, and I do hope that you'll be my guest at one of the screenings coming soon, hopefully. So Tracy realized that throughout Bergen County there were a lot of hungry people, and normally one might think that Bergen County is a wealthy county and there couldn't be anyone hungry there and all of that, but unbelievable. Certainly the number of international students who were at Ramapo College and at Montclair who, couldn't get home because they couldn't fly home, and they were counting on meals from universities, and they weren't, that was shut down. So I just want to point out that she started the Bergen County Food Security Task Force, and it is alive and well to this day, and now so many more food pantries have refrigerators and the ability to have healthy food, and there were a lot of food collections in New Jersey that were operating in silos, and she has pulled that together so that needs can be met, and the need, unfortunately, is still there to this day. But, she did say this was not a Netflix watching, bread baking pandemic for her. She was hard at work and formed this task force, which is just, amazing. So kudos to Commissioner Zur on that. And in terms of nurses, one thing that I want to say is that patients who are in the hospital could not say enough about the nursing staff. One young woman who had 3 children at home, one was a very young child, said she told the nurses, "I can't die, I have a baby at home." And she said they reassured her and said, we will do absolutely everything we can do to help you. And also there was a nurse whose husband became very ill. He was a Newark police officer, and he said, he's been in shootouts, but never as scared as he was lying in that hospital bed. And his wife did all she could to take care of him at home and told him, do not go on a ventilator if you end up in the hospital. And he listened to her and did not go on a ventilator, but he did end up in the hospital. And he survived, and because there was so little contact and everyone was so covered, he wanted to go back to the hospital and when he was healthy and say, thank you for saving my life, but he isn't even sure who they were and what they looked like, because, our healthcare workers, as we all know, are complete heroes. And I haven't mentioned Dr. Brian Strom, who really is a pillar in this film. While most people are talking about their individual stories, Dr. Strom is the head of health sciences at Rutgers and the chancellor of Rutgers Medical School, and he, was able to make remarks throughout the film, sort of explaining what was going on behind the scenes in the medical, from a medical perspective. And he said that this was really a call to war for doctors and nurses on the front lines. They did not know if they were going to die, And they didn't know in the beginning if they were going to go home and kill their families. And it really is true. So their bravery is just, I always think, did we thank them enough, it's very true, what he says. And he also explained that times in some hospitals they had wires going underneath the doors attaching to certain equipment so that doctors and nurses didn't have to go out of the room, but were still able to read blood pressure, oxygen, all of that outside the room. And he said that lack of, being able to put your arm on a patient's shoulder and tell them they would be okay and all of that was, it all worked out great for the people who lived, but those people who did not, it's extremely sad to think about.
Yes. The nurses and doctors, I've interviewed nurses on the show. I've heard nurses being interviewed on other shows, and the short staff, the equipment not being available, they went through long hours working long and hard, afraid. Some of them were afraid to go home. They didn't even live with their families for a while. And doctors also. So, and the firemen and, the police, all the first responders, the ones on the front lines, I just want to say thank you. If you're listening to this show, thank you so much for being there. The cashiers, the people who worked in retail, just to be there and doing their job. I know people complained about long lines or waiting to get into ShopRite or whatever grocery store you go to. But you know what? At least there was food.
And what about the essential workers who deliver food for all of us, right?
Yeah, that's right. All the truck drivers and, just everyone working to make sure that we had what we needed. Yeah, we're supply short. Yes, they were. But you know what? We still, we survived. And I just really have to give a lot of credit, the EMT workers, everyone just involved in helping people. We can't thank them enough, as far as I'm concerned. And the effects that the pandemic had on them were like, Joe, like you said, being in a war zone. They were not used to this amount of death. And it took a toll on them, nurses and doctors. And I can, definitely understand why, because they were not used to that. It literally was being like in a war zone. Excuse me. Jody, as we wrap up, where can people see your film and get in touch with you? It will be in the blog, but you could go ahead. You could say it in the interview if you like.
Sure. I hope that people will feel free to reach out to me through my Facebook page, Jody Small Productions. It's Jody with a Y, by the way. I'd love to hear from you. And we have put this film, entered it in several film festivals throughout the state of New Jersey, and hopefully it will be coming to a neighborhood near you one of these days. But you can certainly keep up with me and the film and where it will be shown by checking out my Facebook page, again, Jody Small Productions. And also we have a website for the film, which I failed to mention the name, The Storm in the Boats. The Storm in the Boats is the name of this film, and the reason for the name is COVID was the storm that came through, and we were all in very different boats. So The Storm in the Boats, Jody Small Productions, and I look forward to hearing from you, and I hope you'll come see my film.
I would love to see if it plays in my local area, because I don't drive far. I would love to see your film. I did see the clip, and it was a while back. I probably should have played it last night, and I got sidetracked to refresh my memory. But I do remember the stories. The clip that I did see was very touching. I said, "Oh yes, I have to interview Jody. This film that has to be out there, has to be heard, watched, and people have to hear you." I hope that it's very successful. I think it definitely will be, Jody. And thank you so much for coming on my show, talking about your documentary, and for doing it. And I want to thank all the people who did partake. Thank you for sharing your stories, because we need to share our stories, because we're not alone. We are definitely not alone. There is someone who shares something similar, and that's how I feel. We really do need to share our stories and love up on one another. That's I guess my 60s coming out, and the time that I grew up in.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and I couldn't agree with you more. You know, stories, memories are what creates history, right? So we have to share our stories, and we are not alone. So thank you so much for doing your podcast.
Oh, you are welcome. It is my pleasure. And folks, you heard Jody Small and with the Y, and I highly recommend to go on Facebook page. It will be in the blog, which Jeannie White, who's station manager, writes. Read the blog for information, and Jeannie produces the show. And I want to thank Lillian Caldwell, who's CEO of Passion World Talk Radio Network, who makes this all possible. I want to thank you, the listeners. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing and sharing. And if you don't already subscribe to Chatting with Betsy, it is for free. I'm on Spotify, Spreaker, Apple, iHeart, Amazon Music, to name a few. I have phenomenal guests on from all walks of life, and you can definitely learn something from my guests, because I know I do. I'm here as a resource. Guests have a lot of resources, and to help you have a better life, and for you to know you're not alone. And if you're a caregiver and you're looking for a support group, I have #Kick Alzheimer's Ass Movement on Facebook. And if you want to follow me, I'm Betsy E. Wurzel, Wurzel. And as I always say at the end of my show, in a world where you could be anything, please be kind, shine your light bright, because we need it now more than ever before. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio Network, a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. Chat with you soon. Bye-bye.